People had been farming Vermont before it was Vermont. A new book by a former Vermont Agricultural Secretary looks at this agricultural past, a time and a place where the only constant was change. It's these changes that are our heritage and a roadmap for how future generations will turn the soil. Good afternoon and thanks for stopping by today. I'm Keith Silva, in for Amy Finley. The old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same, could be the theme of our program today, in a more trite and less poetic title for the book we're about to talk about, Turning the Soil, 250 Years of Vermont Agriculture, written by Roger Albee and published by White River Press and the University of Vermont Center on Research. We don't have all the time to talk about Roger's many accomplishments, but the most important perhaps is that he can trace his family lineage in Vermont to the spring of 1766, when his ancestors settled in what was then known as the New Hampshire Grants in the town of Fane, now known as New Fane. Roger, thanks for talking with me today, and congratulations on the book.
Thanks, Keith.
When we started talking about this interview, you said that above all else, this was a labor of love. How did it come about?
It was a passion of mine. I've been fortunate in life to work in, except for my military experience, to work in agriculture and food policies at many levels, internationally, nationally, regionally, and at the state level. And when I was asked to be Ag Secretary for Vermont, in Montpelier, the Ag building is on State Street across from the Capitol. It's an old National Life building. They have some old safes there. And in those safes, there's yearbooks of agriculture going way back. And in the evenings, I'd sometimes spend my time reading those books because I believe that you have to understand the past to appreciate the future.
Well said, well said. After reading your book, I'm more convinced than ever that farming is the epitome of another old sauce, how to lean into all my old man sayings, a tough row to hoe. Why do people continue to farm here?
Because they love what they do. They love the state, they love the land, and they love working the land with their families over many generations. And there's always been continuous change right from the beginning, and that's what I traced in the book. Just
constant change, as I said at the beginning. There are a few benchmarks in Vermont's agricultural past. I want to ask you about a few of them, starting with Vermont's cash crop, sheep.
Sheep were the first animal cash crop to take place, and the reason that happened is a gentleman named William Jarvis had been consul to Spain, Portugal under Jefferson, and when Napoleon invaded Spain, Portugal, he decided it was time, perhaps they wanted to get rid of their sheep so that they weren't confiscated by the French, and he brought several hundred, and he located in Wethersfield, Vermont, and he became the Ben and Jerry's of the sheep industry. And we had over 1.5 million sheep up until about 1840, mainly because of tariffs. After the War of 1812, they prohibited the importation of products from wool from England, and tariffs were imposed and prices were high, but that was slashed in about 1840, and overnight, so that the wool business declined very quickly.
Merino sheep, that's what they were. Sheep. It's primarily merino sheep.
Absolutely merino sheep.
Okay, known for their wool, the quality of the wool.
Yep.
How did you said they lasted till about 18?
Well, around 1840s until
1840.
Well, but it came back in the Civil War because of uniforms.
Okay. As you said, you've worn about every agricultural hat there is to wear in this state, and the book is a collection, not just a collection of the wit and wisdom of Roger Albee, but you did some really hardcore research here, and one of the texts that you cited was about merinos called "They Lit Cigars with $5 Bills."
Yes.
Tell me about this text.
Well, it was a student who did a youth project in 1976, Betty Jane Belanis, in Addison County. Addison County was known as the sheep breeding capital, too, of the world. Of the world. And people came from all over. The Hammond family was well known out there. And she wrote this story based on a National Humanities Grant, and talks about how many people made real money in Addison County with sheep breeding.
is the $5 bills lighting cigars apocryphal, or was there some truth to that, do you think?
There was a lot of truth to that at the time.
So what happens to all the sheep? Where do they go?
Well, they shipped them all over the world. We couldn't really, at that stage, the wool business for sheep in Vermont wasn't economical because it cost us about $2 a head to raise sheep here. They could do it for 50 to 75 cents in the West and other places. So our breeders started shipping sheep all over the world because of our reputation for breeding. So
we're talking about change. The sheep are here. It's almost like blink of an eye, right?
That's
They're here one day and gone the next.
That's right.
Amazing, and that's why we have the forests that we have in the fields and
Absolutely.
the pastures.
In the stone walls.
And the stone walls, yes, yes. Next time you're seeing a stone wall in Vermont, thank those merino sheep and those guys burning cigars with $5 bills. I'm paraphrasing something that you wrote in the book that I wanted to say out loud, which was you wrote, "Maple is the soul of Vermont agriculture, but dairy is the backbone." Is that still true today?
It is still true today. I mean, our dairy industry is the economic driver and always has been. Even though it's consolidated, it's declined over a long period of time. I think we have about 430 dairy farms in the state.
I think you're about right.
About right. Yep. And that's declined nationally as well as in state, but milk production's increased over time because of technology.
Right.
But maple is the soul. It has been from the beginning. They can't produce maple everywhere.
And they can't produce it as good as they do here.
Well, that's what we think. And Vermont has always gained a reputation. We're the largest maple producing state in the country. Quebec, of course, is the largest in the world, but our maple is the soul of Vermont.
Well said. Since I've been reporting on dairy stories in Vermont going on 30 years or so, the number of dairy farms has been steadily decreasing, as we said. But as I read in your book, of all this talk about change, that is a constant. Dairy is always
a constant.
Up and down.
And we have a reputation for some of the best cheeses in the world and some of the best dairy products as well.
So, Roger, let's talk about the bulk tank. Help folks understand, first of all, what the bulk tank was, and then we'll talk about why it was such a big deal.
Well, the bulk tank is a way for collecting milk on the farm and keeping it cool. And when the truck comes, it can be easily transported to the truck that transports it a long distance. When I grew up on the hillside farm many years ago now, the farmer came and collected the milk cans in the cooler.
Right.
And that existed in about the late 50s and early 60s. The handler said, we want to have bulk tanks on the farms. And at that time, there were studies done by UVM and the Farm Bureau, and it said that you had to have around 28 cows to make it economical on the farm. And the majority of farms in Vermont had 18 or less cows. And by the early 70s, 3/4 of the farms were out of business.
Yeah, it's amazing. We were talking about this before we started. If you think of any industry and to have that kind of, decrease, that kind of change, it would be a catastrophe. It would just absolutely ruin things. But it doesn't. As you said, Vermont dairy is still the economic driver. What do you remember when the bulk tank came to your farm?
Well, my grandfather was farming. My father and uncle had a sawmill, and we had a sugar business as well. But I remember that many people said, I can't afford it to put it in. We had about 10 or 12 people shipping milk in the small town of Brookline. Many of them small farms. And many of them said, either I'm too old or it's too expensive. But I remember when the milk truck driver came around and got those milk cans, it was a very educational experience as well.
Yeah. I just can't imagine, basically technology shows up and says, this is it, guys. That's either you move on or move out.
Move on or move out.
In 1980, Vermont had nearly 11,000 dairy farms and 25 cows per farm. As we were saying, there are more cows now than there ever have been in Vermont, just less farms. And that's due to the technology and all those sorts of other things. What factors play a role in farmers exiting dairy today? Is it technology? What is it?
It's economics.
Economics, okay.
I mean, the price for commodity milk was set in 1937. And that pricing system still exists today. And it's very hard for farmers to compete under an old pricing system. Organic is priced differently, of course, but they need access to markets, they need fair pricing, and they need land, labor, and capital.
You're walking us right into policy, which is something I know is a big part of the book and a part that you like. There have been some big, important names, starting with Justin Morrill, who was a Vermonter who came up with ag policy close to our heart here at UVM and UVM Extension. Who was Justin Morrill and what did he do?
Well, actually, he was a shopkeeper from Stratford, Vermont originally, and when he was elected first as a Whig and then he became a Republican back then to Congress, it's an idea that others had. It wasn't his idea, but for some time there was a need for looking at how can we educate our youth in agriculture and the sciences. And so he built upon an idea that others had and said we need a land grant act. And he got Lincoln to sign a land grant act that others had proposed in 1862. And Vermont became a land grant, University of Vermont. At first they wanted to combine Middlebury, Norwich University and UVM into one land grant, but in the end, UVM became the land grant.
The timing of the Land Grant Act, I should always point out, is very, very key. Sometimes everything is timing, and half the senators who opposed it were no longer part
of
the government.
The South have left. The South was not in favor of a land grant because they thought it was too much government control.
Yes. One more, George Perkins Marsh. Who was he?
Yes, George Perkins Marsh. He was a congressman at the time. In 1847, he gave a speech to the Rutland Agriculture Society, the Rutland Fair, and said, you know, farmers need to look at how they manage the land and how they manage the forest because it can't be destroyed. And then he wrote Man is Nature. He was the first environmentalist.
Yes. Just a little less than a minute left. George Aiken. Can't have a discussion about Vermont without George Aiken.
In fact, my late grandmother, went to high school with him.
Okay. Your roots go deep,
but he was in Congress from early 1940s to 1975, and during the New Deal, he was there for almost every major agriculture thing. He was on the Ag Committee, he chaired the Ag Committee. Rural Electric was part of what he was responsible for. I remember my mother told the story. I said to my mother once, do you remember when they got Rural Electric? She said, yes. Your father was farming with his farm and they brought one line into the house and we had one 15-watt light bulb. And I said, boy, that's awfully bright. We won't need anything more than that. And they were afraid to put electricity in the farm because they thought it would burn the farm.
That's a wonderful story. Turning the Soil is available wherever you like to get your books. Here at Across the Fence, we encourage you to visit your local library and talk with the librarian. Roger, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been wonderful.
And thanks for what you do.
Oh, well, thank you very much. The book is wonderful. That takes care of our show for today. My thanks to the crew behind the scenes here at WCX. I'm Keith Silva. This is Across the Fence. Thanks for being part of our family.